Let's be honest, most men drift. We wake up, we scroll, we work, and then we just rinse and repeat. And we know we're softer than we should be. That's why I built the 31-day resilience reset. This is not a devotional. It is a field manual for men ready to stop drifting and start fighting back. So for 31 days, you'll train your spirit, mind, and body with scripture, prayer, and daily challenges that forge real resilience. Go to www.Undaunted.Life/31 days to download this resource for free. That's Undaunted.Life/31 days. Start your reset today. This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. For even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. That's 2 Thessalonians 3:10. Guys, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. And special thank you to all of our donors. And just as a reminder from last year, we did have some monthly donors that fell off because when we had to change credit card companies, when we got canceled a couple of years ago, we had to switch over to a new system that just defaulted to guys giving for 12 months. So if you've seen your monthly donation fall off, it's because of that. We've got that fixed now. You can just give every month until Rapture if you want to. And so go on, be a donor, Undaunted.Life/donate. Please leave a review for the show and share with a friend. And 31-day resilience reset. Here we are well into January at this point, and a lot of you guys have gotten a lot of great feedback on the 31-day resilience reset. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Undaunted.Life/31 days, Undaunted.Life/31 days. But the feedback has been pretty awesome, right? So I'm getting DMs and I'm getting emails from guys that are like, hey, my entire Sunday school is going through this. Hey, my kids' wrestling team is going through this. My entire men's group, my foxhole is going through this. Because it's like you can do anything for 31 days. Right? And so I give you some challenges every day. There's some scripture that you need to read, some prayer that you got to do. There's a bunch of things that not a bunch of things, but there's some big things that you can't do during that time period. And it's just really been awesome. But I did want to give some feedback to some people because maybe about half dozen, 10 of you guys or so are having problems when you go to the website. So you go to Undaunted.Life/31 days and there's no form. You're like, hey, where's the form? And then you send me an email. Some of you are disappointed. Some of you are mad. It's like, where's this form? It's like, okay, sorry. Allow me to help you get this free resource. So just chill out for 2 seconds while I get you this thing that's for free. But I'm not a huge tech guy, but if you clear your cache in history, that will likely bring the form up. So, if you're on Google Chrome or something like that, clear your cache in history, reopen Google Chrome, boom, the form will be there. Or if you normally use one browser for everything, to switch to a different browser. So if you're a Google Chrome person, go to Safari or whatever. And just in general, if you have a Android, just throw that in a lake somewhere and get you a real phone, get you an iPhone. We don't need some like gateway computers phone. I don't know what you guys are doing. Sorry, just had to take a shot at the Android people because y'all have ruined every group text for like the last decade. What's wrong with you? We can't send videos, we can't send funny stuff because you guys ruin everything, but we still love you. But that's it. If you are not able to see the form for whatever reason, clear your cache in history and cookies and all that kind of stuff, or just use a different browser. So we got a lot to cover today. There's been a lot that's been building up because obviously at the end of last year, had to do a lot of my year-end stuff, but we're back to the quick hitters today. We have an ICE agent shooting a protester in Minnesota. The United States forcibly removing Nicolas Maduro from power in Venezuela. Candace Owens claiming that the Jews are responsible for Maduro's ouster. Surprise, surprise. Pope Leo's deep concern about the capture of Maduro. An uprising in the streets against the current Iranian regime. Rampant fraud in Minnesota. Well, actually, we're not going to cover that today because we're kind of putting that together with the next one. The rampant fraud is basically dovetailing into Minnesota Governor Tim Walz dropping his re-elect bid because of corruption. And then we're going to move on to our main topic for today, which we're going to be looking at New York City. So I used to live in New York City. It was a city that I didn't really like. I lived there in 2012 when I was working for Major League Baseball. I was never really bothered by the speed. It was cramped. It was dirty. Everybody was rude. It was just, wasn't a great time living in New York City. And here we are 10 years later. Things have just gotten precipitously worse in the city. It's dirtier. It's more cramped. And now they had this mayoral election, which is going to basically change the entire face of New York City and potentially the entire country. So let's talk about the mayoral race. Let's talk about the run-up to the last mayoral race. You essentially had three main candidates. You had former governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who was running as an independent because he basically got the old boot out of the Democratic Party. You had Curtis Sliwa, who was running as the Republican representative, and then some complete unknown named Zohran Mamdani, okay, running as a Democrat. So Zohran Mamdani, born in 1991 in Kampala, Uganda, okay? His mom is a left-wing filmmaker. His father is a super left-wing professor at Columbia. He had a very privileged upbringing, private school the whole way, had, a silver spoon in his mouth, lots of money, those types of things. He tried to make it as a rapper, and he failed hilariously. You can go and check that out online. He also worked random jobs like foreclosure prevention counselor. He was a campaign manager in, some small local elections. And then he was elected to the New York State Assembly in the 36th District of New York. He was elected there in 2020. So for all intents and purposes, he was basically not a complete derelict, but just a deeply unimpressive human being, very, very privileged. And here's his campaign strategy when it came to trying to become the next mayor of New York City as a guy in his 30s, his early 30s. The first thing is, I'm a socialist and I'm proud of it, right? Now, he would always put the word democratic socialist before socialist, but that's a qualifier without a meaning, right? There's no such thing as democratic socialism because if it's democratic, it is not socialist. That's basically, we'll talk a little bit more about that. His other part of his strategy is I'm a Muslim, which in a city that was brought to its knees by a bunch of Muslim Islamists flying airplanes into some of their buildings, you would think that that would not be a great thing for his campaign, but that was the center point of his campaign. But the real center point of his campaign was, yeah, I'm a Muslim, yeah, I'm a democratic socialist, whatever that was or is. But his big thing, his big selling point is, here's free stuff. He's the free stuff candidate, right? So he promised free city buses, universal public child care in pre-K, freezing rent prices, city-run grocery stores, $30 minimum wage. And then anytime that he was asked, like, how are you going to do that? There would only be a few answers. One would just be, oh, we're just going to tax the rich people. As if you can just tax the rich people that live in New York City ad infinitum and there would be no consequences, even though we know from history that those that have money are the ones that have mobility. They can leave. They can go do something else. And then there were times whenever he would be asked, how in the world are you going to pay for all this? Like, where will you get all the money to do this? And the answer would be, shut up, you racist. But because obviously he was born in Africa, he's a Muslim, like he doesn't look like a lot of people here in this country. And so obviously even questioning his strategy would just be something that only a racist would do. But then we get to the results. We get to election day, all the betting markets, every pundit was basically predicting exactly what happened. Curtis Sliwa, the Republican, he got around 7% of the vote. Cuomo, the independent, got around 41% of the vote. And Mamdani got over 1.1 million votes, and that was around 51%. So he was elected. So the reaction from most people, again, we kind of had a long time to prepare for our reaction because this wasn't a shock. The shocking thing was that he was even a candidate. And then it became very apparent almost immediately that even if Sliwa dropped out, because a lot of Republicans were like, Sliwa, you got to get out of here. You got to give Cuomo a chance. There just wasn't going to be a chance. Again, if you combine Sliwa and Cuomo, they're only at around 48% of the electorate. Mamdani got 51%. So the reaction from people on the right was, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. How in the world are people doing this? What is wrong with Democrats? How do they keep electing these doorknobs? But, in Mamdani's case, he's actually a very dangerous doorknob. And the Democrats were obviously, there was kind of there were two parts of this. There were very few Democrats that were just overtly, other than like AOC and Bernie Sanders, career useless people, other than those people, they were very, very excited. But every other Democrat was like, oh, sheesh, this guy, this doofus, this guy with this smarmy smile and really nothing to say, but every campaign rally is just, here's some more free stuff that I thought of that I can give to you that I can just magically pull out of thin air. And they're like, we can't really hitch our wagon to this guy, but if we come off as unsupportive, the left-wing part of our base, which we need to get elected, even to get our moderates elected, even if there's such a thing as a moderate Democrat anymore. So it was kind of like, oh, I don't really know. So they were just waiting to see. And then as the tide was shifting in Mamdani's direction, then a lot of people kind of got on board. But now we need to get to the inauguration. Okay, there were a lot of guests at the inauguration, but again, there was, AOC, Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, Letitia James, who is only famous for making up things out of whole cloth to go after President Trump or the candidate Trump. And then he was sworn in. And typically in this country, since we are a Christian nation, you're sworn in on the Bible. Well, he can't do that because he is a Muslim, so he was sworn in on the Quran. And the oath was administered by Bernie Sanders, which might seem random, but it's not random. But the reason it might seem so is because, yes, he's a career worthless person who's never gotten any legislation written or passed in his entire career, and he doesn't even live in New York, but he is a symbol. An ugly, disheveled, ridiculous symbol, but he is a symbol of a segment of the American populace, you could say writ largely the West, but we'll just say the American populace, that actually believes that democratic socialism is a category. They believe that definitionally that is something that is possible. This is a segment of the population that has been convinced, they've taken the poison pill, that somehow, some way, socialism just hasn't been done right yet. And Bernie Sanders is a guy that knows how to get it done. And acolytes of his like AOC or Zohran Mamdani are the ones that can actually get it done. But then when you have a guy like this, again, I talked about this whenever Trump was elected, if Kamala Harris had been elected, it's not just the person that's elected, it's all the people that they appoint. So what you learn about a candidate, or what you learn about an elected candidate, you learn a lot about them by who they appoint to different very important positions. And if you ask the question, who is going to work for this guy, who is he going to appoint? Well, we got those answers pretty quick. As his chief counsel, this is his top legal advisor for New York City. He tabbed Ramzi Kassem. Now, you may not know that name, but you would probably know one of his previous clients because he has previously defended in court convicted al-Qaeda terrorists. That's the chief counsel of New York City now. Again, if you go back, in the Wayback Machine to 9/11, 2001, who was it? Gosh, I'm it's kind of slipping my memory right now. Who was it that carried out the terrorist attacks? Oh, wait a minute. It was Al-Qaeda. It was Al-Qaeda. So in a couple of decades, you have an Islamist mayor that is elected by pretty wide margin. And one of the first people he tabs is somebody that defended the very people that killed thousands of New Yorkers on 9/11. Okay? And then as the director of the mayor's office to protect tenants, which is ridiculous that that's even in office, he tapped someone named C. Weaver. Okay? C. Weaver. Now, here are some of the greatest hits from C. Weaver. This is a direct quote. Private property, including and kind of especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy masquerading as wealth-building public policy. That's the person in charge of protecting the tenants. And she also said that in the future, white families will have what she called different relationship to property. So in other words, she wants to steal the property of white people. Like, just imagine how macabre your brain has to operate to be like, yeah, well, someday, white families are just going to have a different relationship to property. So they will have property, and then the state will seize it to give to people that don't have the same immutable characteristics, namely that they're not white. Okay? And she has also called to impoverish the white middle class, that's a direct quote, and has endorsed no more white men in office. So this is a complete left-wing loon bag. That was another one of his first appointees. But let's go back to the inauguration. He obviously does an inaugural speech. Right. And, a lot of these speeches, they can kind of draw on for a long time. There's typically not anything actionable that we can glean from that, because you'll have people that'll make these big grandiose statements, but then they can't really back it up with stuff that they can actually pull off because they have to work with the legislature or they have to work with other city leaders anyway. But there are some very important things that we were able to glean from this. So the highlights from Mamdani's speech, obviously he talked about all the free stuff again. He, made allusions or direct references to class warfare. He was describing what can only be, categorized as soft on crime policies, talking about how the government's your friend and the government can solve any problem. And that's obviously very concerning. He also talked about how he wants to normalize, again, quote unquote, democratic socialism. The exact quote from his speech was, "I was elected as a democratic socialist and I will govern as a democratic socialist." Okay. Now, as we've already described, there's no such thing as democratic socialism because inherently, if it is democratic, it does not have any elements of socialism in it. But I think in this discussion, a lot of people kind of get lost in the terms and like, okay, what is socialist? What is communist? So socialism is essentially, it's an economic system where the major industries and resources, okay, they are owned in a lot of ways, heavily controlled by the state or by the public, right? Some combination of that. And then the wealth that is generated from those resources or industries is redistributed around, okay, to reduce inequality, right? So big air quotes, scare quotes around inequality. That's what socialism is. Socialism is flowers, right? But then we get to communism. Communism is, it's socialism with guns and balls. Okay, that's what communism is. Because under a communistic system, all the property is collectively owned, right? Private ownership is abolished. It's not a thing. There are no such thing as markets, and the state controls the means of production. That's what the state does, because what the state is trying to do, in theory, is to get rid of classes, to have a completely classless society. But everywhere that communism has been done, I don't like to say tried, because they were doing it. They weren't trying it to see if it worked. They weren't going to hit the reverse. Everywhere where it was done, there was a classless society because everyone was equally poor, except for the people that were ruling everything, right? Kind of Animal Farm. Some people are more equal than others, right? And so we had this elevated group of people that were in control of everything. They had all the money, all the resources, and the populace was equally poor. So that's communism and socialism. And the quote from the speech, right? Because again, he's talking about democratic socialism. That's lipstick on a pig. There's no such thing. You can't add democratic before socialism and all of a sudden get rid of socialism. You can't talk about socialism unless you talk about the downstream consequence of socialism, which is eventually communism every time. But there's one quote from the speech that should send a chill through our spines, right? An absolute, I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, is this AI? There's no way he actually said this, but it was very apparent very quickly that he did indeed say this. Here's the quote. "We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism." I'll say that again. "We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism." Now, wait a minute. Isn't rugged individualism what built this country? The spirit of exploration, the pioneer spirit, expansion, improvement, building, risk-taking, right? Setting off into the unknown. But according to the new mayor of New York City, the exact attitude that allowed this country to be what it is today, the most dominant, rich, and hegemonic nation in recorded human history, is somehow frigid. But, it's not frigid, according to him, collectivism. Now, obviously, a lot of you might ask, what in the world is collectivism, right? We think we know what that means, but specifically in this political, cultural context, what in the world is that? So it's a political, social, and cultural philosophy that emphasizes and prioritizes the group over the individual, okay? So we're looking out for the group. We're looking out for everybody, not the individual. Okay, so essentially the rights of the group are superior to the rights of the individual. That's an easy way of thinking about it. Now, if we go back in history a bit, just a bit, we've actually seen plenty examples of collectivist leaders. We've seen a bunch of them. I mean, at least leaders that con their populaces into believing that they were collectivists, that they actually had their best interests at heart. So we've seen Fidel Castro in Cuba, Benito Mussolini in Italy, Vladimir Lenin in Russia and then the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, Adolf Hitler of Germany, and Mao Zedong of China. Okay? Now let's take each of those men and let me remind you of how many people that those men were responsible for murdering during their reigns. Shall we? Fidel Castro in Cuba. Again, these are all estimates. They can be all over the place, but I'm going to try to give you the best, the tightest historical ranges. Fidel Castro in Cuba is responsible for the deaths of 10,000 to 30,000 people. Benito Mussolini in Italy, 250,000 to 500,000. Vladimir Lenin of Russia and then the Soviet Union, somewhere between 3 and 8 million people. Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union, somewhere between 10 and 20 million people. Adolf Hitler in Germany, somewhere between 11 and 19 million people. And then Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao of China, 40 to 70 million people. Okay, now as I'm saying those numbers, a lot of you, they just, when you start talking about thousands and millions and tens of millions, the numbers can just kind of go nuts. But I think most people have a plausibility structure when it comes to sports. Okay, so let's look at this past weekend, right? There was a bunch of, playoff games in the NFL, right? We've had some college playoff games. Let's just say, there's 70,000 people, right, in a stadium of some kind. Okay? Do you know how many stadiums you have to fill up to get to the amount of people that Vladimir Lenin killed? Adolf Hitler? Mao Zedong? Right? I mean, just think about the last time you were in a full arena, so maybe that's 30, 40,000 people, or a full stadium, depending upon where you are, 70 to 100,000 people. How many stadiums do you have to fill up? Let's just go to the high end of Benito Mussolini. The high end is 500,000 people, right? So you go to a game at Penn State or Michigan or, one of those Big Ten schools, right? On a given weekend where they're playing a ranked team, that's 100,000 people there in the big house in Michigan, right? You have to fill up 5 of those stadiums. That's how many people that Benito Mussolini is responsible for killing. And he's a novice compared to Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, and Mao Zedong, right? Now let's take those guys as well, and let's go back and see some quotes from those people. Well, actually, let's go back to the quote from Mamdani. So this was the quote, the chilling quote. "We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism with the warmth of collectivism." Now I want to read some quotes from the men that I just described that are responsible for tens of millions of deaths. So Fidel Castro: "We abolished privileges, annihilated the great landowners, threw out foreign monopolies for good, nationalized almost every industry, and collectivized the land." Fidel Castro. Now Benito Mussolini: "The 19th century was a century of individualism. It may be expected that this will be the century of collectivism, and hence the century of the state." That's Mussolini. Now Vladimir Lenin, Russia and then the Soviet Union: "The individual must be subordinated to the collective. The interests of the state are above the interests of the individual." That's Lenin. Now Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union: "Socialist society alone can most fully satisfy these personal interests. More than that, socialist society alone can firmly safeguard the interests of the individual." That's Stalin. Now Hitler: "It is necessary that the individual should finally come to realize that his own pride is of no importance in comparison with the existence of his nation. By this we understand only the individual's capacity to make sacrifices for the community." That's the heartwarming man that is Adolf Hitler. And then lastly, Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao of China: "At no time and in no circumstances should a communist place his personal interests first. He should subordinate them to the interests of the nation and of the masses." And so we, as Christians, most of us listening to this, have to ask, is there any room for collectivism, as I've defined before, in the Christian worldview? Is there any room? And the answer is no, there's not. And there's a lot of reasons why it doesn't comport with the Christian worldview. But here's a few reasons that I can give you before we get back to Mamdani. Number one, collectivism does not jive with the Imago Dei, right? That we were all individually made in the image of God. So essentially what that means is because we are made in the image of God, because of that fact alone, each one of us has irreducible dignity. Irreducible dignity. So our dignity is not tied to where we land in some sort of hierarchical structure inside of some political or cultural system. Okay, so it doesn't jive in that way. A second reason is in the Christian worldview, there is no collective morality. Morality is judged on an individual basis. So we see the Apostle Paul write this in his letter to the church in Rome, Romans 14:12. "So then each of us will give an account of himself to God," right? We have individual sin. We have to individually repent and individually put our faith in Christ for our individual sin debt that was paid for on the cross by Jesus. It's an individual thing, not a collective thing. And just the last reason I'll give you before we move on about how collectivism doesn't jive with Christian worldviews. Collectivism is a system based on theft, not charity, right? Because you see a lot of people talk about, oh, Jesus was a socialist. No, Jesus upheld the law, right? And in the Ten Commandments, it talks about we shouldn't steal things. And because people will talk about the Acts 2 church, about how the early church held everything in common. But you have to ask yourself, was that compulsory? Were those actions compelled by the local magistrates, by the local state leaders, the nation? No. They took that on voluntarily. They chose to take their possessions and put them into a common environment for the good of the church, the ecclesia, the gathering of believers, right? So basically, any way you slice it, collectivism and Christianity are oil and water. They can't and do not mix. So as I'm kind of going through all this, am I saying that Zohran Mamdani will or even has the capability of becoming this next great, socialist, communist, totalitarian dictator? Like, no, I don't. I think our system, luckily, would prevent that, right? But Zohran Mamdani is indicative of a shift in our body politic that could spell the end of the United States of America. And when I say that, I'm not being hyperbolic. I actually believe that, but not because of socialism per se, and not even because of communism per se, and not even because of collectivism per se. It's something new. It's something that struck me as I was thinking through how Mamdani was able to rise and kind of trying to read the tea leaves of politics and culture. And there's something new that we haven't seen before is Islamic collectivism. Islamic collectivism. So one odd thing that we've seen is what is generally tabbed radical Islam, right? Even though, as we've talked about before, there's no such thing as radical Islam. There's only fundamentalist Islam. And radical leftism have oddly gotten into bed together. It just seems so weird. And the memes are pretty funny. So the memes are cartoons of people with, purple hair and nose rings and LGBTQ t-shirts and all that, holding up signs, talking about queers for Palestine and things like that. And then it's like, okay, if we were to transport these leftists to Middle Eastern countries, if they found out that they were gay, they would try to throw them off the tops of buildings to kill them, right? And you're like, well, what do these people know? It's, the joke is like, okay, it's chickens for KFC, right? That's basically what you're saying. But here's the thing that we all have to realize. At its very core, leftism and all the ideologies therein are inherently atheistic, right? You are the center of the universe. You, although you are, in their view, a cosmic accident that came from the macroevolution of humans, from chimps, from fish, from goo, from stardust, we are somehow the point still. We are somehow the point. We can create meaning. And yet there is no point at the same time. There is no higher calling. Everything is nothing. Everything came from nothing. And life is meaningless short of whatever we deem personally meaningful, right? It's very, very atheistic. But Islam obviously is not atheistic. No. Muslims believe in Allah, and at the core of their faith is the declaration called the Shahada, which is two parts. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And so leftists and Muslims, right? Just basically, not even like wild leftists or wild Muslims or radical leftists or radical Muslims. Leftists and Muslims seem like a very strange couple, very, very strange bedfellows, which leads to the question, why would Muslim fundamentalists and woke leftists join forces? And there is an answer. A lot of think pieces have been, thought up about this, and a lot of ink has been spilled. It's actually rather simple. Because they have the same enemy. They have the same enemy. But no, it's not America. And it's not even the West. Their ultimate joint enemy is Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And their trifold enemy is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. So the emergence of collectivist Islam is one of the most nefarious ideological forces Satan has ever concocted. And we're just now living in the extrapolation of that, right? We're actually watching it happen. Because some people might say, well, wait a minute, if we go back in time, we can see there were collectivist Muslim nations and things like that. No, they weren't collectivists. They were conquering, right? That's why we can even have things like the Crusades or all that, because after hundreds of years of Islamic conquering of Europe, Asia, the Middle East, it was only then that Christians started to push back. That wasn't collectivism by the Muslims, it was conquest. But the rise of Islamic collectivism is the most nefarious thing that we've seen since Marxism, the creation of Marxism, everything that Karl Marx thought up, and everything that's downstream of that, which is socialism, communism, feminism, wokeism, all of that. But we do have to be real about something. Leftists are certainly dangerous. We'll talk more about that here in the quick hitters, but we've seen leftists be violent. We've seen them murder. We've seen them destroy. We've seen them riot, loot, burn. But there aren't that many of them. There's enough of them to destroy a lot of things, to disrupt a lot of things, but there's not that many of them. But what about Islam? There are roughly 2 billion Muslims worldwide right now. Roughly 2 billion. That's a quarter of the Earth's population. Now, luckily for humanity, luckily for the world, most of those Muslims are bad Muslims. They're bad Muslims. And what I mean by that is that most of those Muslims do Islam badly. Thank God they do Islam badly. Because these are people that are categorically Muslims. They are nominally Muslims, but they don't really pay attention to what Muhammad wants them to do. They don't read the Quran. They don't read any of the hadiths. None of it. They are indeed peaceful Muslims. But they aren't peaceful because of what the Quran and hadiths teach. No, they're peaceful in spite of what the Quran and the hadith teach, in spite of what Muhammad, their false prophet, tells them to do. But the number of people worldwide that do and will do the things that Muhammad taught is growing. It's actually growing very, very fast, right? People talk about radical Islam. No. Fundamentalist Islam, core doctrinal Islam is on the rise. But the thing about this rise is you're thinking like, okay, yeah, it's going to be more terrorist attacks and suicide bombings and all that. And while that's true, Muslims aren't just using overt tactics like suicide bombers and, mass terrorist shootings. They're using covert tactics as well. It's the covert tactics that are actually the most concerning. So last week on the show, I had the great Raymond Ibrahim back on the show. He is likely the foremost scholar in the world right now on the wars and the conflicts between Christians and Muslims. And he's got a great trio of books. There's Sword and Scimitar, there's Defenders of the West. And we talked about the Two Swords of Christ, which is his new book. But I want to bring up again a very interesting section of his newest book, The Two Swords of Christ. So it's from chapter 12. So if you've got the book, go to chapter 12. I'm going to start reading on page 86, okay? Unlike Christianity, which condemns all forms of deceit, a position which Christians then and now inadvertently project onto Muslims, Islam takes a rather lenient approach. Indeed, entire doctrines are dedicated to articulating the various ways Muslims may deceive others with more stringent requirements for lies directed at fellow Muslims, e.g. through the employment of tariya or double entendre. Most of these teachings, however, tend to be conflated and placed under the umbrella terms of Islam's most notorious doctrine of deception, taqiyya. Taqiyya, that's Taqiyya, taqiyya. Let believers, the Quran 3:28 declares, not take for friends and allies infidels instead of believers. Whoever does this shall have no relationship left with Allah, unless you but guard yourselves against them, taking precautions. And then Sheikh Al-Tabari, author of the standard and widely referenced Quran commentary, offered the following exegesis of the Quran 3:28. If you Muslims are under their non-Muslims' authority, fearing for yourselves, behave loyally to them with your tongue while harboring inner animosity for them. Know that Allah has forbidden believers from being friendly or on intimate terms with the infidels rather than other believers, except when infidels are above them in authority. Should that be the case, let them act friendly towards them while preserving their religion. Similarly, another mainstream authority on the Quran, Ibn Kathir, explains Quran 328 as follows. Whoever at any time or place fears evil from non-Muslims may protect himself through outward show. As proof, he quotes Muhammad's close companion Abu Darda, we grin to the faces of some peoples while our hearts curse them. So Ibrahim goes on to discuss how the tactic of taqiyya was used all over Europe to help Muslims take advantage of the welcoming nature of Christians, only to aid in their slaughter later and the overall destruction of their countries. So ultimately, Islamic collectivism has the attractive qualities of collectivism. Happy feelings, free stuff, good vibes, pie in the sky, right? But it is undergirded by the murderous ideology of Islam. So it's an iron fist wearing a velvet glove, right? And we have to be real about what Islam is. Islam is the great dragon, okay? It is the largest force of evil on this planet, and it just got to glow up, which is the mask of collectivism. Again, there's been a lot of people since 2015, 2016 that have been worried about wokeism and worried about the rise of leftism and all that, and I've been one of the people screaming about all these things as well. That is not the great enemy. They have gotten into bed with the great enemy, which is Islam. And that's why someone like Zohran Mamdani is so dangerous. Because he can't be president of the United States, because he wasn't born here, right? I guess that would make him the second president born in Africa to be the president of the United States. Conspiracy theorist? All right, digression. So he can't be president of the United States. But if Republicans lose the House and Senate this year, which the House being lost is basically a foregone conclusion, it's the Senate that's still up in the air. It's statistically likely, but we'll see. But if they lose the House and the Senate, or the House or the Senate, and don't retain the White House in 2028, which is an open possibility, a Zohran Mamdani character, someone that believes the way he does, could become our next commander-in-chief. It's a real possibility. So Zohran Mamdani, if he has his way, will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism that built this country with the warmth of collectivism. But as we've seen through history, the only reason that collectivism is warm is because it's soaked with the fresh blood of its people. Hey guys, real quick, you've probably heard the phrase, ignorance is bliss, right? Well, some of you are ignorant about where the beef that you buy at the grocery store comes from and what it took to get to you. So that single package of grocery store ground beef can contain meat from over 100 different cows, sometimes from multiple countries. And if one of those cows was sick or mishandled in some way, it's mixed right into your dinner. So most people don't realize that some ground beef at the store isn't just beef either. It's scraps and trimmings chemically treated with ammonia to kill bacteria and then blended in to bulk up the weight of what you're buying. It's legal, it's cheap, and it's on the plates of Americans all over the country, usually without the customer ever knowing. So even if you buy what you think is a nice roast or steak, it's been passed from feedlot to processor to packaging plant, handled by people who will never eat it and raised by farmers who will never see the end product. And in that journey, the cattle were likely fattened on hormone-packed feed, pumped full of antibiotics just to survive cramped feedlot conditions, and processed alongside meat from hundreds of other animals. And by the time it hits your grill, you don't know whose cow it was, what it was fed, or what's actually in it. I don't want you or your family eating low quality, jacked up beef. That's why I want you to use the official beef delivery partner of Undaunted.Life, Primal Beef. So Primal Beef is a cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. He's a retired Navy SEAL that partnered with Jocko Willing to launch Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from other beef delivery companies? It's a combo of the following. All American Black Angus cattle, and the beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The beef is all natural, no hormones ever, no mRNA ever. And after slaughter, the entire carcass is dry aged, then hand cut by artisan butchers, and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains tenderness, marbling, and flavor. And here's another cool thing. For every box sold, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride in knowing that your purchase will help put literal food on the table for America's finest warriors. If you're still on the fence, it's probably because you've been eating too much soy, drying your emo tears with your bangs, and you've forgotten what real food tastes like. Primal Beef can help with that. Try Primal Beef out today by going to primalbeef.com. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle to get $25 off your first order. Again, that's primalbeef.com. Promo code Kyle to get $25 off your first order. All right, let's get to the quick hitters. An ICE agent shooting a protester in Minnesota. This has obviously been dominating the news since last week. So this is according to the Daily Wire on January the 7th. The woman who was shot by an immigration and customs enforcement officer in Minneapolis on Wednesday has been identified as 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. The woman was allegedly behind the wheel of a vehicle that appeared to be blocking a Minneapolis road that ICE officers were trying to drive through, according to video circulating online. The officers were seen approaching the woman as she sat in her vehicle and asked her to get out of the car. The woman remained in her vehicle and was seen reversing it and then moving forward. One video appeared to show the vehicle rolling ahead and touching an ICE officer before shots were fired, killing the driver. The shooting incident is still under investigation. So since this time, since the incident middle of last week, a bunch has taken place. Right? A bunch of videos have been released, have been circulating online. And here I am. I'm recording this Monday morning. So by the time some of y'all are hearing this on Thursday, when this episode is released, we're likely going to have even more information. But as of this exact moment, we have enough information to know precisely what went down. Okay? So we're going to show the video of the incident. But before we get to that, we do need to set up what you're about to see. So, and there's likely going to be a long investigation into this matter. Obviously, it's a federal investigation because it's involving a federal law enforcement officer. But according to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, there's going to be a long investigation. They're going to get to the bottom of everything that could possibly be attached to this. Okay. So Renee Good was purposefully blocking ICE vehicles. Okay. There was a video that was showing several minutes before this incident showing her doing just that. Okay. She has actually taken classes. We know this now. She has taken classes from very left-wing organizations funded by George Soros, of course, on how to most effectively prevent ICE from doing their job of finding and arresting illegal aliens. Okay? That is something she has been trained to do. She's a trained agitator. So I think the term they give themselves is legal observer or something like that. But essentially, they're just there to make law enforcement's job very, very difficult. So she's a stay-at-home mother of 3 kids, but she now lives as a lesbian. She's married, but again, we can just call the person she's living with her live-in girlfriend. And she has been stalking, right, or at least that morning, she had been stalking and impeding ICE agents throughout the city that same morning. Okay, so there is a mainstream media narrative out there that she was just a lady, just a mom that dropped her kids off at school and just kind of took a wrong turn and was just innocently trying to drive home. And that just doesn't comport at all with the truth, even a little bit. Again, you do not hate the mainstream media enough. But she, in this video, and you can see this all over the internet, she drops her girlfriend off so that her girlfriend can video what she is about to do with her vehicle, which at a minimum was to block ICE vehicles on the street. Okay? Like, we'll see what the investigation confirms, but we have all of that on video. Okay, so now let's go to the initial video that was released of the entire incident. Let's go to that video now. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and describe what happened in the video here for those of you that haven't seen it. But we see her, she's got her Honda Pilot SUV, midsize SUV, blocking an ICE vehicle. As Kristi Noem said, that the vehicle had gotten kind of stuck in the ice. They're trying to get it out. Well, she's purposely trying to block the ICE vehicle so the ICE officers cannot do their job. And so ICE officers come up to her vehicle. They pull the handle. They're trying to get her to get out of the vehicle. She puts it in reverse, and then she puts it in drive, and then she is shot. Okay? Now, from that angle, again, that was the initial angle, that was a release, it's reasonable to come to a couple of different conclusions. On the one side, hey, she was just trying to get away. She was trying to get out of the situation. She wasn't trying to hit the officer. So I could see how you could watch the video, like just the quick video, and see that. Or on the other side, you can see that she definitely was trying to hit the officer. She was definitely obstructing ICE, and she was definitely trying to run over that ICE officer. I can literally see how you can come to both of those conclusions. Well, now let me show you a slow-mo version of that same video. Now, for those of you watching on YouTube and Rumble, I want you to pay special attention to her front driver's side wheel, okay? her front driver's side wheel. Landon, let's go to the clip. Okay, so for those of you just listening to the audio podcast, we took the audio out because it was just like slow motion. It just, wouldn't have really given you anything, so it didn't add to it. But if you're watching it, and again, I would encourage you to come to our YouTube to actually watch the clip if you haven't seen it. As you can clearly see, her wheel was pointed towards the ICE officer when she accelerated. Again, because she was in reverse, and then she accelerated. But thank God the roads were slick from the ice and snow there in Minneapolis, so her tire did not immediately get any traction, okay? Because if it did get immediate traction, she would have hit the ICE officer even harder, because yes, she did actually hit the ICE officer. But I've got a third video that I want to show you. This is the last video I want to show you, because it's the actual video that the ICE officer was taking with his cell phone. Okay, so some people said it was a body cam video, but this is, a video that he's taking with his camera. And this is from the point of view of the officer that shot Renee Good. Okay, so just if you're listening to this, the grating harpy in the video, the one kind of talking, that is Renee Good's girlfriend. But Landon, let's go ahead and go to that clip now.
Change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine. U.S. citizen, former fucking veteran. You want to come at us? You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
Out of the car. Get out of the fucking car. Get out of the car.
All right, so what we see in this video is this ICE officer getting out of the car. He's initially on the passenger side of the Honda Pilot that Renee Good is driving, and he's walking around. Renee Good engages with him. She's got, this very sarcastic smile on her face. She starts talking a little bit of trash. She goes around and takes video of the license plate, and then Renee Good's girlfriend is, chirping at him a little bit as well. And another interesting thing, after Renee Good's girlfriend is like kind of basically openly threatening him and saying, "Oh, get a lunch, big boy," or whatever. If you look down at the passenger side front wheel, it's pointed to the left. I can't know this for sure, but I'm assuming that the officer saw that. So then the officer places himself on the driver's side front fender. And at this point, again, you might have missed it, but Renee Good's girlfriend she's attempting to get back into the passenger seat of the Honda Pilot. But when the officers are trying to get Renee out of the driver's seat, the girlfriend yells, "Drive, baby. Drive, drive." And so here's the thing about this last video. You could surmise this from the first two, but the last video proves it. This is completely justified. The shooting is a completely justified shooting, 100%. Because federal law enforcement agents tell her to get out of the vehicle. She refuses. She is told on repeat to get out of the vehicle. She continues to refuse. An agent places himself near the front of her vehicle, telling her to get out, and she starts accelerating in his direction. He then takes his sidearm, which he already had drawn just in case, and shoots this deranged lunatic in the head, killing her, and it was justified. I mean, regardless of your political persuasion or general philosophy, I think we can all agree to those facts. I mean, this is one of those bizarro world moments where you're trying to understand how people could watch the same videos and understand the same things about how the world works and how what makes everything go around and come to the completely opposite conclusion. And to say that this woman was murdered, that this is just some random woman that got stuck in the snow in an ice age and is great. This is what I've been waiting for my entire life. Boom, boom, boom. Finally got to kill me somebody. Oh man, this is great. And I ain't even going to go to prison for it. What? How could you watch that and come to that conclusion? So I do have some quick notes on this situation. I've heard a lot of people say, well, the officer didn't need to do that. The car was turning, you see. It was turning to the right. Well, the slow motion disproves that. It certainly disproves that. But go back to his cell phone video, okay? And now, if you have a midsize SUV or just walk up to some random one in the parking lot and put your torso on the driver's side front fender, and then tell me which direction the wheels are turned. Oh, you can't? Right. Because in that position, you can't see anything below the hood. But we do know something interesting about this officer. Previously, when he was doing an arrest, he was actually dragged by a vehicle. Because we basically went from having no ICE people being hit by vehicles or targeted with vehicles, and it's gone up like hundreds and hundreds of %, especially this year and last year in 2025. But this officer had previously been dragged. He was dragged over 300 feet. He had to get dozens of stitches. So he's got all of this in his mind at this exact moment. And where he was positioned, he couldn't see the tires, but he could feel himself being pushed back by the vehicle, right? I mean, how can you watch those 3 videos and come to the conclusion that this woman is not an immediate danger and threat to law enforcement and to the community at large? Because what some people lose in a lot of these police-involved shooting videos or things like that is sometimes when the police engage with suspects, again, they have to, a action is faster than a reaction. That's just definitionally true. So the officers have to try to get left of bang to prevent something bad from happening. Because let's say she takes off and there's, kids walking in the street or something crazy and she's driving erratically on an icy road, and now somebody in the local populace is killed by this deranged lunatic, and the officer could have prevented it. That's exactly what law enforcement is there to do, to protect the public. And a lot of people are talking about how this woman was unarmed. I keep hearing that in these news stories. An unarmed protester was shot and killed by Minneapolis or ICE officers in Minneapolis today. Are you idiots really willing to claim that an SUV weighing well over 2 tons is not a weapon? It's not a weapon. In a lot of ways, you would probably rather have the SUV than a gun. What is wrong with you people? And a lot of people are talking about how this woman clearly did not intend to run this officer over. Well, again, let's look at the evidence. She accelerated with her car pointed at the officer. So that kind of disproves what you're claiming. But also, I would respond to that person that says, well, she clearly didn't intend to run him over. How in the world do you know what her intent was? How could you possibly know what she was intending to do? Because we can't judge someone's intent based on a video, but we can, however, judge their actions. And based on her actions, it seemed like she indeed did want to run this officer over. Now, Democrats, of course, want this to turn into another George Floyd situation. There were tens of thousands of protesters in Minneapolis over the weekend, and I think some other places across the country. They're really trying to get this going. It doesn't seem to be going that well, but this is great for their campaigning, right? We'll kind of see how this goes, but we will certainly see this used. I mean, at the end of last year, I made a prediction that there will be ICE officers likely killed by protesters this year. And so obviously we've seen this. I think that's going to continue to apace. And Democrats, obviously, they don't know how to tamp down that kind of energy because they need it, right? Because left-wing violence is something that helps them big time, helps them with voter turnout, helps them with fundraising, all those types of things. So they're big fans of it. And also Democrats, of course, will talk about this forever. Look at this. They just recently did a candlelight vigil for January 6th. A candlelight vigil, right? All these Democrats, they sang songs and, sat there solemnly holding that. So they're going to talk about this forever. They're going to continue to look at this day. They're going to memorialize the day that this left-wing agitator was shot after she tried to run over an ICE officer with her vehicle. But there is a question for all of us to consider with this situation is why were ICE agents even there to begin with? Because were ICE agents just randomly in Minneapolis that day because that was what was on the docket? Well, no. They're there because there's rampant fraud occurring in that state and in that city from people, a lot of which are illegal immigrants. And there are dangerous illegal immigrants that are torturing the local populace just with their mere existence in this country. So why were they even there to do the job that they were tasked with doing? But let's go to my big takeaway here on this, because I've come up with a foolproof plan on how to avoid being shot by law enforcement. Okay? I'm serious. It is a 3-part plan. And man, this might be really, really difficult for a lot of you to understand. This might be very hard for you to really fully encapsulate this and kind of like solidify it in your brain, but I will do my best to speak slowly and to explain it. Okay? 3-part plan. Step number 1, don't break the law. Okay? Don't break the law. Because I'm not worried about being shot by law enforcement because I don't break the law. Because if you break the law, you will likely run into law enforcement of some kind. Local, county, state, federal, something. You're going to run into law enforcement. So I kind of put it this way. There are people that have a fear of being attacked by sharks, right? Or being eaten by a shark. So I have that fear, right? Because I wasn't made for the ocean, so I don't know why I would go in there. But that's obviously my point. The odds of me being killed by a shark in the ocean, if I never go in it, are 0. Unless there's some sort of a Sharknado situation and a great white shark is literally shot out of the Pacific Ocean and lands on me, right? And so like, if I don't go in the ocean, the odds of me being attacked by a shark are 0. They're non-existent. And if you don't break the law, you likely aren't going to run into this situation either. So that's step 1. Now, step 2. When you encounter a clearly identified law enforcement officer and are given a lawful command, do what you're told. That's great advice. It's the same advice I got from both of my parents when I started driving. When you encounter a clearly identified law enforcement officer and are given a lawful command, do what you are told. And you know what? I'll even take it a step further. When you encounter a clearly identified law enforcement officer and are given an unlawful command, do what you're told and deal with it later in court. I've seen plenty of police-civilian interactions where maybe the police officer has overstepped their authority, and then this person is trying to challenge the law enforcement officer in the moment. Even if you know it's an unlawful command, and most of us don't know that because we don't know all the different laws or whatever, but let's say you're one of those people, right? You know that they're giving you an unlawful command, okay? Go ahead and comply with their unlawful command, and then sue the pants off the city after that. Go for it. But in that situation, remain unthreatening. That's step 2. But let's go to step 3. Don't perform any action that could reasonably be deemed a violent threat to law enforcement or the public. Step 1, don't break the law. Step 2, when you encounter a clearly identified law enforcement officer and are given a lawful or unlawful command, do what you're told. And step 3, don't perform any action that could reasonably be deemed a violent threat to law enforcement or the public. Okay? Renee Good, any reasonable person can see that she was a violent threat in that moment and her weapon of choice was a 4,400-pound SUV. So this officer was clearly able to do that. Now I'm going to say something that's going to kind of rub up against some of the MAGA people or whatever, but let's actually go back to January 6th. People are like, oh, look at all the people that died on January 6th. The only person that died directly because of January 6th is Ashley Babbitt. Okay? She was climbing through a broken window to try to get into, the legislative chamber, and she was shot by Capitol Police. Now, you can quibble with whether or not she should have been shot or all those things. Great. You can make that argument. But I can guarantee you that if Ashley Babbitt had not been on the Capitol grounds that day, she would be alive. Or she at least would not have been killed there. If she had not gone into the Capitol, she would not have been killed. If she did not try to climb in through a broken window, she would not have been killed. Same is true for Renee Good. If she had not been trying to block ICE officer, think of the number of times she could have stopped this outcome from happening. She could have just generally not been a left-wing lunatic. She could have had a real job and been at that real job. She could have not been spending her days and spending that morning trying to bother ICE officers and keep them from doing their jobs. She could have not pulled her Honda Pilot in behind an ICE vehicle trying to block them. She could have complied with the officers at any point when they said, put your vehicle in park, get out of your vehicle, any of those types of things. She could have not pointed her vehicle straight at an ICE officer and hit the accelerator. Think about the number of times that this could have been prevented. Because everyone's like, oh, this was preventable violence. I completely agree with you. And that is 100% Renee Good's fault. 100%. This law enforcement officer did the right thing because Renee Good was a public threat. The law enforcement were threatened in that moment, but also the general public. So we'll see how this goes. The law enforcement officer has had his identity revealed. Obviously, he and his family are now in danger. And so we hope and pray for nothing but the best for them. Yes, it is a tragic thing that this woman lost her life. Anytime you're talking about a loss of life and something like this, it is a tragedy. But unfortunately for Renee Good and the people that love her, it is a tragedy of her own making. All right, next quick hitter here. The United States forcibly removing Nicolas Maduro from power in Venezuela. So there was a lot of bluster and a lot of threats from Maduro, but essentially Trump made good on his promise to depose the murderous dictator from Venezuela. There's a lot that's been made about the military operation. So Delta was at the center of this operation, but there were a lot of different facets that went into the military operation. I'm not really going to elucidate any of those now, but we did a lot of stuff. We did a lot of stuff to take out a lot of people in order to get Maduro and his wife out of the country. He and his wife will be standing trial in this country. There was a post from Attorney General Pamela Bondi. Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have been indicted in the Southern District of New York. Nicolas Maduro has been charged with narco-terrorism, conspiracy, cocaine importation, conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices against the United States of America. So Maduro has already appeared in court. Obviously, there was a lot of reaction to this because we woke up early on a Saturday morning to this. Conservatives and normal Americans were like, this is awesome. He's a murderous dictator. He has basically been choking out this populace that has perhaps the most oil-rich and resource-rich country in the entire world. They have more, I think they have more oil than the entirety of the Middle East and more gold than the entirety of Africa. They've got so much down there in Venezuela. So conservatives and normal Americans are like, this is obviously a net positive. Democrats and leftists were like, this is insane. They've literally never seen a left-wing dictator that they weren't a fan of. So obviously they did not like this very much. But I have a message to a lot of different groups of people as it pertains to this, because again, this has dominated the news cycle other than the Minnesota stuff for the last couple of weeks. So to the American Democrats that are just apoplectic right now, it is very telling that you are yelling to the heavens that you don't even believe in about how bad this is. And yet the people of Venezuela are celebrating in the streets. How is that even possible? Because look, the left-wing media is trying to find the Venezuelans that are disappointed that Maduro's gone and they can't find him. So they are either silent or they're having to feature Venezuelans that are absolutely elated with this outcome. Also, to the people that, this is actually really funny. I've heard this so much. Trump broke international law. There's an entire crowd of people, even Republicans, that are saying, well, Trump kind of broke international law. Just listen to me here. There is no such thing as international law. Just like democratic socialism isn't a thing, international law is not a thing. And I can prove it by getting you to answer a single question. Who enforces international law? Who is the enforcement agent? The enforcement party? Who enforces international law? Where's the international law? Here's another question. Where's international law written down? Where's that written down? Because guess what? When it comes to the enforcement of international law, it is individual nations with their individual interests choosing to come together collectively with other similarly minded nations to do some sort of enforcement mechanism, right? But everything is at the threat of a gun. Trump broke international law. Okay. Then arrest him. Go ahead. He clearly broke the law, according to you dorks. Arrest him. To which they're looking around like, oh yeah, there's no one to arrest him because international law is not a thing. Come on, people. Also, there's people, it's just about regime change and oil, right? That's all this is. Well, duh, you morons. Of course it's about regime change and oil. So I've talked about this before. Basically, every war, every conflict is about regime change. Because there's country X and country Y. They don't like each other, and they want to depose the leaders of the other country and to control their resources. That is what warfare is. That's what it is. Hey, look, I want your land and I want your resources. And at different times in human history, I also want your people. Well, I don't want you to do that. I want your land and your resources and your people. Well, do you agree to that? Well, of course I don't agree to that. All right, well, let's fight. That's what war is. And you have to think, don't we want to be in control of that oil? We need oil for everything that we need as a country. Again, there's a great arms race happening with artificial intelligence and quantum computing and the joining of those two things. And AI and quantum require insane amounts of energy. That's why China is building a new coal plant every week or two. That's why they're going to pollute the skies. They don't give a crap. They want to keep getting the coal. They want to keep getting oil out of the ground. They want to keep taking natural gas from Russia, all those different things. America will be behind if we are not in control of things like crude oil, of natural gas. Again, the renewables are basically worthless, right? Because we just basically don't have any way to store the renewable energy like wind and solar. The battery systems, there's just a mathematical problem. It's not a technology problem. But yes, this is about regime change in oil. And if America can be in charge of that regime change in oil, that's obviously a net positive, right? Because we built the infrastructure, right? We built it. And so we own it. But then they reneged on the deal when we built all of it decades ago, and now we're just taking it back because it's ours to begin with. So a big takeaway on this. Is it a good thing that Maduro's no longer in charge? Well, yes, it's a good thing that Maduro's no longer in charge. But it's actually going to take a really long time for the dust to settle. I do think it was funny. Same day, there were people Saturday night that were doing think pieces like, well, things have not changed on the ground in Venezuela very much. It's like, well, can you give it a second? Their dictatorial leader has been out of power for about 7 hours. Let's just wait and kind of see what's going to happen. So likely there will be democratic elections. When that will happen, we don't know. Okay. All that infrastructure that I just told you about that we Americans built and Americans paid for in Venezuela, those people down there did not know how to maintain the infrastructure or to upgrade the infrastructure. And so it's going to take years for American workers and American oil people and companies to go down there and fix all the infrastructure that they let rot or just didn't do the upkeep right or any of those types of things. It's going to take a while. Also, about 25% of the Venezuelan population over the last 25 years have left. They become refugees of other countries. And Maduro actually opened his prisons and opened his mental facilities and basically ferried all those people from Venezuela into the United States during the Biden administration. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's true. So a lot of these Venezuelan refugees should probably go back to Venezuela. Perhaps after a democratic election, after some of the things have been rebuilt, after some of these kill squads that, the people kind of holding on to power in Venezuela right now after they kind of stop doing what they're doing. So we're going to see a lot of refugees opting to go back on their own without being deported from wherever country they're in. There's also an open question about how many American boots on the ground will be required to do this. Because I just got to tell you, if you're ExxonMobil or if you're one of those companies that's got to go down and fix this infrastructure, are you going to have to deal with guerrilla warfare from the local populace, from loyalists to Maduro? People that are still lingering loyalists to Chavez? Are you going to have to do that? Because there's probably going to be some sort of a contingent of American boots on the ground. Not a ground war, not a quagmire, but that's an open question. Also, just how much of their oil and gold do we get as Americans? How much of that do we get? Because here's the thing, people are like, we're stealing Venezuela's resources. Well, because of their infrastructural issues and their political issues, the local populace of Venezuela was not going to benefit from their resources anyway. It doesn't matter if you're standing on top of ground that has oil if you can't get the oil out of the ground, right? And so the local population of Venezuela will certainly benefit from the extraction of oil and gold from their country, but how much will we as Americans benefit from that? That's an open question. But here's another question that a lot of people are missing in a story like this. How many fewer overdoses will occur because Trump did this? One of the kind of things that flew under the radar in 2025 is overdoses in this country fell off a cliff. Praise God. But it fell off of a cliff. Why? Maybe because DEA, maybe because the federal government was actually controlling the border. We were blowing up drug boats in the middle of the ocean or in the middle of the Gulf of America as they were on their way to this country, dropping off, pallets full of drugs that could have at least gotten Americans to overdose, if not just being straight up poisoned with fentanyl and things like that. But because of this, and if this kind of foreign policy can continue, at least for the next year, because I think, once Republicans likely lose the House, Trump's going to be, impeached, and there's going to be all this kind of stuff. But over the next year, how many fewer Americans will die because of this move by Trump? Big fan of his foreign policy. Some of the stuff on the domestic side, I'm not a huge fan of, but he's absolutely been killing it on the foreign policy front. All right, next one here. Candace Owens claiming that the Jew... when I read this, it's almost too on the nose. Candace Owens claiming that the Jews are responsible for Maduro's ouster. So the morning I woke up and I started watching the news about this going on, one of the thoughts I had I almost posted, I wish I had, because it would have been, frozen in time. I was like, all right, how long until Candace Owens somehow blames the Jews for the ouster of Maduro? But this was posted by Candace Owens on X. I guess I'll call it X now. I guess I've transferred from Twitter. Here we go. The CIA has staged another hostile takeover of a country at the behest of the globalist psychopaths. That's it. That's what is happening always, everywhere. Zionists cheer every regime change. There has never been a single regime change that Zionists have not applauded because it means that they get to steal land, oil, and other resources. Hope this helps. Actually, it does help, Candace. It really does help. Thank you so much for posting that. Again, it's a Candace Owens claim without any supporting evidence. And again, I realize not everything you tweet or say has to have a bibliography attached to it, but this is just another one of her claims that she doesn't support or back up with evidence. It's kind of her thing. Again, it's a statement meant to outrage us, whether we outrageously agree or outrageously disagree. No matter what, she gets clicks and attention, which is what she wants. And again, it's more evidence of her, at best, default opposition to Israel, but at worst, her default hatred of Jews, her default anti-Semitism. So big takeaway on this one. If you still take Candace Owens seriously as a purveyor of truth and modernity, you're beyond help at this point. I was kind of empathetic and trying to really reason with a lot of Candace Owens people last year, really trying to seek to understand their position. But at this point, how much more do you need to see that she is a grifter? She is not a purveyor of truth. She's not a journalist. She's not just trying to get down to bedrock. She is trying to suckle at the teat of all the attention that she is getting that leads directly to her bottom line. So she will talk about Brigitte Macron. She will talk about Charlie Kirk. She will talk about TPUSA. She will talk about the Jews. She will talk about whatever she needs to talk about to keep you paying attention, to keep you listening. But I hope this is happening. I hope Candace Owens burns hot and then burns out. Because, man, she was burning hot last year. #1 podcast in the world at one point towards the end of last year. But I think and I hope that her followers or her acolytes or her fans are finally beginning to wake up and realize, man, there's no there. Man, this conspiracy stuff is really fun. It's really exciting. This Gnosticism of, oh man, I have some secret knowledge that I've gained from Candace Owens, who has secret knowledge because she's being communicated to in her dreams. How incredible. Man, she keeps saying these things that, goodness gracious, sound plausible. And yet when she's asked to provide anything that even resembles evidence, oh, wait a minute, I never said that. Well, that's not what I said. Well, no, Candace, I have the video right here. I have the quote. No, I don't know that that's me. Come on, guys. Why are you still taking her seriously? Grow up. All right, next quick hitter here. Pope Leo's deep concern about the capture of Maduro. So this is according to America Magazine on January the 4th. In his first public comments since the U.S. military operation that captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on January the 3rd, Pope Leo called for safeguarding the country's sovereignty and ensuring the rule of law enshrined in the Venezuelan constitution. Speaking at his Sunday Angelus, I think that's how you say that, on January the 4th, the American-born Pope said he was following the developments in Venezuela with deep concern, adding, "The good of the beloved Venezuelan people must prevail over every other consideration." This must lead to the overcoming of violence and to the pursuit of passive justice and peace, guaranteeing the sovereignty of the country, ensuring the rule of law enshrined in its constitution, respecting the human and civil rights of each and every person, and working together to build a peaceful future of cooperation, stability, and harmony, with special attention to the poorest who are suffering because of the difficult economic situation, the Pope said. Here's my big takeaway on this one. Where the hell were you before the raid, Pope Leo? Where were you? Were you too busy praying over a block of ice? Were you too busy making sure that the study center in the Vatican had enough prayer rugs for the Islamic people that were coming to study there? Were you too busy? Because all of a sudden, we have this grandiose statement where you're worried about the sovereignty of a country that had been taken over by a dictator. You're so concerned about ensuring the rule of law that's enshrined in its constitution that was being ignored by Chavez and Maduro. Respecting the human and civil rights of each and every person, the rights that those people did not possess under the Maduro regime. You feckless idiot. Are you kidding me? So you release this statement after he's brought through because you're a leftist. Because no matter what Trump does, you have to oppose it, and you're just going to cover it with this, milieu of religiosity and your stupid pointy hat and pointy shoes. But the reality is you are a leftist political acolyte. That's what you are. Because you were saying nothing of this sort before this happened. You seem to have no concern about the goings-on in a country where there were Catholics because you didn't care. You didn't have a thing to say because you didn't care. But now you can kind of pseudo-dunk on the president of the United States, right? And so is this your thing? Because people are like, I really have hope that Pope Leo is going to be different than Francis. He's just like Francis. Everyone was trying to tell you Francis loved this Leo guy. Loved him, right? Pope Leo learned a lot from Francis, and we're seeing it happen now. This is not a serious person. He's not the vicar of Christ. He is the Bishop of Rome. That's all he is. He holds no authority within Christendom, and his opinion should only be paid attention to insofar as you are able to surmise what this person is believing so that he can change the opinions of other people. Because there are unfortunately millions and millions of people that listen to the opinion of Pope Leo and listen to his declarations publicly. But I want you to open your eyes and ask yourself this question. Where was he before this raid? Where has he been since the moment he took office, since the moment he became the pseudo-pope? Where was he? He was nowhere. He had nothing to say, which says a lot. Next quick hitter here, an uprising in the streets against the current Iranian regime. So this is a very fluid situation. A lot of things are changing, but I'll just read this from the Time magazine reporting on January the 7th. Violent protests in Iran over the country's weakening economy have now stretched beyond 10 days. We're at several weeks now, killing at least 36 people and intensifying pressure on Islamic Republic as it confronts the most sustained unrest in 3 years. Again, this reporting says it's a few dozen people. There are reports that it could be hundreds, if not thousands of people that have been killed by the Iranian regime. But back to the Time report. Among the dead are 4 children and at least 2 members of Iran's security forces, according to rights groups. Hundreds more have been detained as authorities move to suppress demonstrations that show little sign of fading. The protests have spread to more than 200 locations across 26 of Iran's 31 provinces since last week, the human rights activist news agency reported on Monday. HRANA has also documented more than 2,000 arrests so far, underscoring the scale of the state's response. Iranian officials have not released their own comprehensive casualty or arrest figures yet. Sanctions tied to Iran's nuclear program, combined with the lingering economic damage of a 12-day war last summer with Israel and the United States, during which U.S. forces struck key Iranian nuclear sites, have battered the country's economy. The rial has collapsed to roughly 1.4 million to the dollar, fueling inflation that has pushed basic goods out of reach for many Iranians. Longstanding corruption and mismanagement have only deepened the crisis. President Donald Trump said last week that if Iran violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue, adding, "We are locked and loaded and ready to go." So the situation is continuing to unfold. The internet has basically been turned off in the country. It's very hard to get on the ground access to what is happening. We don't know exactly how many people are being killed. But I'll just kind of be clear here. I'm not sanguine about the chances that the populace can overthrow the current regime. I mean, we've seen uprisings like this before. Perhaps this is fundamentally different, but it does look at least superficially the same as some of the other uprisings that we've seen even within the last couple of decades. Is it enough to overthrow the current regime, bring in a different regime? Maybe. Is the United States going to get involved? Maybe. It really won't be for the benefit of the Iranian people. It'll be for the benefit of America and the West and Israel to get the Ayatollahs out of there, right? To really kind of pump the brakes on their nuclear program and all those types of things. But let me go to my big takeaway on this one. Even if Trump goes into Iran and does what he did with Maduro in Venezuela, the power vacuum in Iran will still be filled by Islamists. It's the only option. Iran, however you want to say it, Iran is not going to be taken over and ran by, it's not going to be a democracy. It's not going to be a Western democracy. It's going to be a country where the power vacuum is filled by Islamists. Go back to what I was talking about earlier about Islamic collectivism. It doesn't matter if an Islamic nation right now is moderate. Because of the trajectory of history and the trajectory of the conflict between Christianity and the great dragon that is Islam, there will be no room for moderates in the future. None whatsoever. Because people are like, what about the UAE? And what about these other nations that are like Qatar that they seem nice and all those types of things. Eventually, they have to do what the Quran says. They may not be doing it right now because a lot of those countries that I just mentioned, especially the UAE, man, they're great places to live. A lot of people live there. A lot of people from the West live there. Nobody wants to live in Syria. Nobody wants to live in Afghanistan. No one wants to live in Iraq, right? Certainly nobody wants to live in Iran. But the road of all of these Muslim countries has to bend towards an Islamist bending and has to bend towards jihad. It has to. That is the logical outworking of this. And so a lot of people are, wringing their hands. Oh, they're excited. Oh, the Ayatollah is going to be overthrown or whatever. And maybe that's going to be good temporarily for the people of Iran. Maybe that's good temporarily for the Middle East. Maybe that's good temporarily for Israel, for the United States. But we have to be real. Again, I will keep saying it. Islam is the great dragon, and history bends towards the conflict and the final conflict between the forces of good and the forces of evil. Christianity is on the good side. Islam is on the evil side. It's just the way that it is. All right, last quick hitter here. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz dropping his re-elect bid because of corruption. This according to the Minnesota Star Tribune on January the 6th. For a fleeting moment, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was on top of the political world. It was the summer of 2024, and Walz had become the unlikely Democratic vice presidential nominee alongside Kamala Harris after signing a sweeping progressive agenda into law in Minnesota. Then his political career unraveled almost as quickly as it took off. Walz suffered a bruising national defeat, lost his close friend and colleague in a political assassination, and found himself under a white-hot scrutiny for a sprawling fraud crisis in the state's welfare programs. On Monday, January the 5th, almost a year and a half after Harris asked him to be her running mate, Walz stood before a crowd of reporters at the Minnesota Capitol to announce he was dropping his bid for a third term. His beard... I must have misread that. His wife, First Lady Gwen Walz, looked on as he read a brief prepared remarks and then left abruptly without taking questions. Yeah. Tim Walz's precipitous drop, or as we may call him, Tampon Tim, his precipitous drop from the heights of Democratic power is something that should probably be studied in a lab. Along with his rise, what in the world was Kamala Harris thinking? Tabbing that doofus as her running mate, right? Probably the best description of Tim Walz is that thing outside of like a car wash that they blow the air up through. And it's just like the green guy with his arms flailing and all that. That was Tim Walz. And so if he was just a goofball, that would have been enough to not take him seriously. But apparently he's somewhere between inept and corrupt because of the things that happened on his watch while in Minnesota. And we have to go back to 2020. He was in charge when his city was basically destroyed by people that were mad about George Floyd, a guy that overdosed and died while in police custody. He did nothing to stem the riots. He wanted it to happen. Again, his wife said she would leave her window open at night so that she could smell the burning tires It was a smell of revolution, right? These are insane people. But he was basically taken out by a 20-something-year-old YouTuber. I can forget the kid's name, but he doesn't need any credit. He's all over the place right now, but he's like a 23-year-old YouTuber that was just going around to these supposed Somali businesses and daycares and health clinics and things like that. Just basically, hey, is anyone here? Hey, is anyone doing anything? Hey, are there any kids here? Hey, I'm trying to get my kid into a school. Is there a spot available? And just started uncovering fraud after fraud after fraud. And after every visit to these fake facilities, the tens of millions of dollars worth of fraud was just racking up, all on his watch. Isn't that so interesting? And Representative Ilhan Omar has a job where she's making not that much money and her net worth has gone into the millions in the last few years. How in the world did that happen? How in the world did that happen? And I would love to see what the actual net worth of Walz is at this point. But I'll go straight to my big takeaway as we wrap the episode today. What an unbelievable bullet we dodged by Trump winning this last presidential election. Can you imagine what the last year would have been like if it was Kamala Harris and Tim Walz? And again, I talked about this because it's easy to kind of, just kind of dismiss them as dumb people, as alcoholic, as doofi, which I'm going to make the plural of doofus, even though I think it is doofuses, but these doofi, right? But the danger that they would have brought to the American populace, not only would they have been the most pro-abortion candidacy and the most pro-abortion White House that we had ever seen in the history of this country, think about what would be happening on the international side of things right now. Again, Russia likely invaded Ukraine because they're like, wait, there's a dead person at the will of the United States of America. They're not going to do anything. And they didn't for the entirety of the Biden administration. And now Trump's trying to unravel this mess, and it's just become a huge mess. But think about the wins that have come, especially on the international front. Trump shut down the border on day one. Just think about that alone. The border would not have been shut down. Likely there would have been a surge at the border for the last year. How many millions of illegal immigrants, including a bunch of criminals, right? Because criminally, they are all entering this country illegally, which is a criminal act. But then there are people that are going to be doing additional crimes. Murder, theft, rape. Think about the millions of people that would have been just spread out throughout the country. And then you'll have the local news story of a local teenage girl that was held down and violently raped by some Central American man or some man from the Middle East that just immigrated through the southern border. Never going to make national attention because it doesn't really jive, because we can't have a whole lot of negative stories about the border, right? Because we gotta keep up the image that things are under control no matter what. But I am so thankful. Again, I've got my problems with the Trump presidency 1 year in, certainly. A lot of it's on the domestic front. But the wins have been substantial. I love the direction that it's going. The first Trump presidency was a little chaotic. It was a revolving door of people that worked for him. He seems to have gotten that on lock. I love what J.D. Vance is doing. Marco Rubio has been a superstar so far. I mean, he has 15 different jobs in the federal government right now, but he has been spectacular. And I try to think back, what would the administration look like if it was Kamala Harris at the top? What would we be dealing with right now? We wouldn't be dealing with any of the wins that I've just described, but it's an unbelievable bullet that we've dodged and an unbelievable blessing. All right, guys, that'll do it for today. Before we go, we're going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So don't forget, you can donate to Undaunted.Life, Undaunted.Life/donate. If you want to do a tax-deductible donation to support what we're doing with the Daily Blade, you can check that out in the show notes as well. And then I've got the notes and the references to everything else that I talked about throughout the entire episode. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.